Good morning, juniors and seniors. I am Adriana Wright, co-president of the class of 2020. Today's event, Town Hall, is to discuss gun violence across the nation. You will have a chance to ask questions. There are 2 microphones on either side of the auditorium. If you are uncomfortable asking a question in English and you would prefer to ask it in Spanish, we have a translator. If you have to ask a question, we ask that you raise your hand and get a teacher's attention so they can escort you to either microphone. Lastly, please be respectful and keep the phones away. And please, no talking so we can hear the questions. Thank you. Now I'm happy to introduce Victoria Lee, Class of 2019 President.
Hi guys. Our keynote speakers for today are Representative Michael Thompson and Congresswoman Madeleine. Representative Michael Thompson has represented the state of California in Congress since 1999. He served in the United States Army from 1969 to 1972. He graduated from California State University in 1982 and was a member of the California State Senate from 1990 to 1998. Please give a warm round of applause for Congressman Michael Thompson. Congresswoman Madeleine is a graduate of Abington High School, LaSalle University, and Widener Law School. She was first elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 2012 and served in that role until being sworn in a member of the United States House of Representatives in January of this year. Please give a round warm of applause to Congresswoman Madeleine.
Good job.
Good morning. Can you hear me in the back? Yes? Yes? Wonderful. Thank you. Good morning. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with you and with my colleague, Mike Thompson, who took time out of his busy schedule to travel with me from D.C. to here before going home to Napa. He really wanted to be with you, and I really thank you for this honor. Thank you, Victoria and Adriana, for your kind introductions. Thank you, Principal Roth, Assistant Principal Smith, for the opportunity to be here. I thank the students, the staff, the teachers, the administration for putting this together. Mostly, I thank the students. I'm so thrilled to be here with you. We're here to talk about a difficult subject, but America needs to talk about it. It is our American gun violence epidemic. First, let me offer a few facts. In 2017, our government reports that nearly 40,000 people died in this country of gun violence. That is a substantial uptick from previous years. Another 100,000 were literally wounded, caught in the crossfire. Of that 40,000, tragically, more than half were from suicide, gun violence, suicide. That means every day, 109 Americans are shot and killed. That's 1 person every 13 minutes. In the 90 minutes you and I will spend together today, 7 of our fellow citizens will be gone, another 23 wounded. Other countries don't live like this. In the UK in 2011 saw 146 deaths in the entire year. Portugal, 142. Denmark, 71. Japan, 30. However, I am mindful of today's tragic news. You heard that in New Zealand there was a mass shooting. My last hearing was that 59 people have died in that shooting. But it is a uniquely American problem as well. So we've got to be honest with ourselves. America's enormous, awful gun violence numbers aren't the norm. They're unique in the industrialized world, and it's time we got our heads and our hearts and our legislation around that fact. We also need to think about it on a human level. Last month, I was in D.C. and we were introducing the bill that you will hear about from Congressman Thompson. And a young woman from Chicago described growing up and losing so many friends to gun violence. She and her best friend, he worried, would he make it to his 18th birthday? And then she told the story that on his 18th birthday, he was shot and killed. The week before that, I attended a gun safety event at the synagogue in Elkins Park. The event was organized by young people like you. The guest speaker was Samara Barak, a survivor of last year's Parkland massacre that killed 17. She went through something no one should have to go through, and she simply said over and over again, I just want to go back to a normal high school life where I worry about having fun with my friends, getting to class, doing my homework, and getting to college. I just want to be normal. And we want the same for you. I was part of the Million Mom March way back in 2000. It was on a Mother's Day in 2000 following a terrible shooting. In 2012, after Sandy Hook, as a state representative, I began the PA Safe Caucus to try to get some legislation forward. As I worked with other activists and legislators in Harrisburg, I realized that part of our problem is that we have some of the weakest gun laws. Right now, for example, at the federal level, you can buy a gun at a gun show, online, over the internet, in a parking lot, from a stranger, and you don't have to go through a background check. That's why we recently passed H.R. 8 in Congress. The bill, written by Representative Thompson, who joins us today, it's really simple. It says if you want to buy a gun in America, you have to pass a background check. If that sounds obvious, I agree, it certainly is. 97% of Americans agree that background checks are the right way to go. I don't know what else 97% of America could agree upon. We passed that bill 2 weeks ago. The next day, we passed another bill, H.R. 1112, to close the Charleston loophole. You know what that loophole is. On the federal level, if you go in and perform a background check and they cannot get clarity on your background in 3 days' time, the default is that the licensed firearm dealer has the permission to sell the gun. That's not true, luckily, here in Pennsylvania. Our default is to know after 10 days. And recognize that background checks, most of them are completed in 90 seconds. In the case of the Charleston loophole, the shooter in that case, in that beautiful church, taking so many lives, he knew that rule. He did not have clarity on his background check, went back in 3 days, got his hands on the gun, and in 5 days, he was declared not eligible, a prohibited purchaser, but it was too late. That's why we passed the second bill. We're working to change that law. For a long time, Congress has refused to act on gun violence, but that's changing. Thanks to a wave of new members and the longtime work of people like Congressman Thompson and the extraordinary work of people like you, I want you to know, if you know nothing else, that your participation in this conversation, your activism, has made all the difference. My chairman in the Pennsylvania House, after Parkland, said, I was moved by the students, the courage, the bravery the Parkland students and other students across this nation, like you, have taken. So I'm delighted to tell you we've passed 2 bills in the House. Now we need to make sure the Senate passes them. But to tell you more about this, I am so honored, as I said, that Mike Thompson, Congressman Mike Thompson, who has been on this issue his entire adult life, most importantly, as the chairman of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force in Congress, I'm delighted to introduce him to you and let him offer you his experience and his credibility on this issue, and I'm sure he too will enlist your help. So could we give a very big Norristown High School welcome to Congressman Mike Thompson.
Thank you. This microphone works? Thank you for the very nice introduction, and thank you very much for being here this morning and inviting me to your wonderful school. First, I was talking to the administration, the teachers out in the lobby, and I heard great things about your school, and I heard great things about all of you. So congratulations, and I know great things will come out of this class, these classes, and out of this school. And thanks for the pin. I'm very, very proud to wear it. And thank you to not only the school, but the entire community for sending to Washington, D.C. this incredible Congresswoman. She is fantastic. You go ahead. I've been in Congress for a little over 20 years, and I've seen a lot of members come, and I've seen a lot of members go. And this year we have a pretty big class of new members of Congress, and there's one that stands out, and it's Congresswoman Dean. She is just lights out, brilliant, and working real hard for her district and for all of you. And that was very, very apparent when the bill that I've written to help deal with gun violence came before its first legislative hearing in Congress. The first one. Now you think about this. I became the chairman of the task force on gun violence prevention about 6.5 years ago, after the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut, Newtown, Connecticut, where 20 little kids were murdered and 6 educators were murdered. Then Leader Nancy Pelosi, now Speaker Nancy Pelosi, appointed me to be the chair of this task force. She did it because I support the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. I believe people have a right to own guns. But I think with that right comes certain responsibilities. And I think that our Congress should be very proactive in making sure our students and our communities are safe. Well, 6.5 years ago, I wrote a bill to expand background checks. We had mass shooting, murder after mass shooting after murder. The House was controlled by the other party, and their response to all of that was a moment of silence. Mass shooting, moment of silence. Mass shooting, moment of silence. Mass shooting, moment of silence. No action at all. Some of us became so frustrated, we shut down the Congress. We had a rally on the floor of the House of Representatives, and we closed the Congress for 28 hours. We stayed and we held the floor for 28 hours, demanding action instead of just moments of silence. Nothing. Not a single committee hearing, not a single vote on the issue of gun violence. In November, that changed. When you sent Congresswoman Dean to Washington, she and the other new members made up a new majority. We elected a new speaker. And one of the first bills that went through the Congress, through the House of Representatives, was my bill to expand background checks. And Congresswoman Dean is a co-author of that bill, as she should be, because she led that effort right here in Pennsylvania when she was a member of the state legislature. The bill went to the committee on which she sits, the Judiciary Committee. And we had a full day. I think you guys met for 10 hours on that bill. A 10-hour hearing on one piece of legislation. That's very, very out of the ordinary. And as you can imagine, I was like a proud father. I went to that hearing and I sat through most of the hearing. And the questions were great. It was just inspirational. And Congresswoman, the questions that you asked led to the passage of that bill. And she, because of her experience in this and because she cares so much about gun violence, she had an idea to amend the bill to make it better, to make sure that people who were afraid that they might do something inappropriate with a firearm could give it to someone else, for them to hold it to ensure that somebody didn't do something wrong. That was her amendment. It was put into the bill, and the bill was passed with that amendment in it. And the bill was reported to the floor, where we had a vigorous debate on the floor, and the bill was passed with bipartisan support, Democrats and Republicans voting to pass that bill over to the Senate. Now, when I started 6.5 years ago, I didn't start out to let's expand background checks. I started out to figure out, by bringing experts from all sides of the issue to the table, to figure out what it is we could do to improve safety and help prevent gun violence. We had hearing after hearing, not official hearings, because remember, the Republicans wouldn't let us do that. We had to have these rump caucus hearings, but we brought experts in and we heard all of the different ideas. And all of the experts believed and made us believe the best thing, the most effective thing, and the quickest thing you could do to save lives would be to expand background checks. To make sure that when someone tries to buy a firearm, they go through a background check to make sure that they're not a criminal, to make sure that they're not dangerously mentally ill, to make sure they're not a danger to themselves or to others. Now, mass shootings get all the headlines, and that's what we hear about. And sadly, we heard about another one today with what happened in New Zealand. Sadly, we heard about one yesterday, what happened in Brazil. And it seems like hardly a day can go by when there isn't some sort of headline. The thing that doesn't get a lot of attention is that every day, 30 people are killed by someone using a gun. If you add to that suicides and accidents, it goes up to about 100. There's been over 3,000 people killed already this year by someone using a gun. It's an epidemic. It's something we can do something about, and it's something that everyone should say, enough. Let's do all that we can to end gun violence. Now, I think it's appropriate that we're here in this high school today because young leaders across this country have a vested interest in this. You're all part of the community. You're all every bit as at risk as anyone else, but you have a tremendously powerful voice where you can speak up and you can make sure we do something about gun violence. And if you doubt that, and if you hear anybody say, well, you're only a high school student, what can you do? Look no further than Parkland High School in Florida. After that tragedy, it was the Florida student leaders who spoke out. The Florida legislature, they never passed gun violence prevention legislation. But when the students spoke out, they passed measures almost immediately. The governor at the time, you couldn't get that guy to sign a gun violence prevention bill, if you'll excuse the term, if you held a gun to his head. Yet he signed those bills before the ink was dry. I submit to you that the fact that there were 300,000 17-year-olds in Florida who were going to be eligible to vote in November had something to do with that. Do not underestimate the power that you hold. Get involved, stay involved. Student leaders across this country turned out to support the background check legislation. They worked in every state, they worked in most congressional districts, and they had an impact. That bill was passed. It's over in the Senate now, a Senate that has said, we're not going to take the bill up. They're not going to take the bill up until they hear from student leaders across this country and from community leaders across this country. Then we'll hear their tune, because this is important. It saves lives. We know that background checks save lives. And we know that 93% of American people support expanding background checks. This is something that we can do, this is something we need to do, and this is something that you have an opportunity to play a great role in. So thank you very much for your interest. Thank you in advance for all that I know you're going to do to help bring it to fruition.
My name is Delaney Nolan, and I'm in 12th grade. And I wanted to ask Madeleine Dean, do you support the Second Amendment? Do you support the Second Amendment?
Which gives people the right to own firearms, and I certainly do. But like every other amendment to the Constitution, no one of them is absolute. Freedom of speech, for example, the First Amendment, is not absolute. You know the expression that you're not allowed, by law, it would be unconstitutional to run into a crowded place and scream fire. So there are limitations, appropriate limitations on all of these amendments, and the background check bill, I believe, is one of those appropriate limitations. But I thank you for the question.
As well as what other laws or bills do you want to be passed with gun violence?
I thank you for that question. What other laws, what other bills? I made sure that my very first bill had something to do with gun violence because I care so much about it. And you know, technology has changed tremendously. So a bill that I introduced that I hope will get some hearing and I hope a vote, and I'd love it for it to pass, is updating the Undetectable Firearms Act. You know, nowadays you can build a gun 3D out of composite materials, and that gun could pass through a security device at an airport, for example, without detection. We certainly know that we have limitations on what we can bring onto airplanes, so we need to update the laws to make sure that with changing technology, with composite materials that would be non-detectable to X-ray machines or new technology that does scanning, we need to update that law to make sure weapons cannot be brought into such places, airlines, federal buildings, other things like that. We also just this week introduced, Debbie Wasserman Schultz introduced Jamie's Law, named for Jamie Gutenberg, one of the children, young people murdered at Parkland. And this would be to require background checks on this sale of ammunitions. The law is that you're required to have a background check, but we don't have it so that when you buy ammunition alone, you have to complete a background check. So that's another bill. Mike, do you have other bills you want to talk about?
Well, let me go back to your first question on the Second Amendment before, and just point out that in the decision of Heller versus the District of Columbia back, I think, in 2009, the Supreme Court, that case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that under the Second Amendment, everybody has a right to own firearms, undeniably. But that in that opinion, they also said that that right can be regulated. And that's real important. So you have a right to own a firearm, but the government can regulate that. And what we're saying is that if you have one of the if you're prohibited from owning a firearm for any reason, if you're a violent criminal, if you're a domestic abuser, if you're a chronic drug abuser, if you're dangerously mentally ill, then that prohibits you from owning a firearm. And the courts have found that that is appropriate. And we know that it saves lives, that background checks save lives. There are a number of bills that are going to be discussed in Congress in this session. Everything from the measures that Congresswoman Dean mentioned to bump stock prohibition. There's going to be some mental health issues that are going to be looked at legislatively. There's going to be, I'm introducing a bill next week on mental health. I'm introducing a bill next week on expanding the prohibitors to ensure that somebody who has committed violent acts that don't elevate to the level that's required today are not allowed to own firearms. I'm sure there'll be magazine capacity bills that will be looked at, assault weapon ban bills that will be looked at.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lionel Yates, and I'm in 12th grade. And I was wondering, how are we going to prevent children and/or teens from getting their parents' guns?
Great question.
Repeat the question.
Oh, how do you prevent children and teens from getting a hold of their parents' guns? Great question.
That's a fantastic question. And let me just stipulate right up front, there is no bill that will solve every problem. there's no gun bill that will totally prevent gun violence, just like there's no traffic laws that will prevent all traffic accidents. It's a step. I have a friend who explains it as it's a lot like getting a flu shot. It may not stop you from getting the flu, it may not stop you from getting sick, but it helps to prevent that from happening. Now, the reckless ownership of firearms is an issue. I know in California, in my state, we have a law that will hold the adult responsible if they don't properly secure their firearm. And anyone, not just a kid, but anyone gets a hold of it and causes a problem with it. I believe that if you own a firearm, as I said earlier, certain responsibilities go with that. Safe storage, and there's a bill in Congress on safe storage of firearms, and I think that's important. Gun manufacturers often sell, and in California they have to, so when they sell a firearm, they provide a locking device. It's another way to do it, but it's just one more area that should insist on gun owner responsibility.
And just from what the congressman said, you can see that state by state the laws are different. All the more reason that we in Congress have to put a blanket of legislation, whether it's safe storage or background checks. And so one of the things that I know Pennsylvania is doing is directing physicians to make sure that they talk with parents, to say, do you own a gun? Is there a gun in your house? And do you have it properly stored? Unfortunately, I think there's an awful lot of parents who say, oh, I got it stored and my kids don't have a clue where it is, and even if they did, they wouldn't know how to access it. We know young people are a lot smarter than that. So there's lots of things we can do, but all the more reason we do it at the federal level. Thanks for the question.
No problem.
My niece and nephew have 2 little girls, and last week my niece was telling me that one of their daughters was invited to someone's house to play, and for a sleepover party type thing, and she said, well, I just called the mother, and I said, do you have firearms in your house? And if you do, are they safely stored? She said, and the woman said, well, we do, but we don't have a gun safe or anything. She said, well, then my daughter's not going to be able to come to the party. So there's a responsibility that we all share in that as well. And people should be aware. You should be aware of where your kids play, and your parents should be aware of where you play. And if you see a firearm someplace that's not secured, don't mess with it. They're dangerous if they're not used correctly.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jose, a senior. I had a few questions. One of them is Switzerland has a very high rate of gun ownership, but the last mass shooting they had was in 2001 of killing of 14 people.
I'm sorry, I did not hear you.
All right, so my question is, Switzerland has a high rate of ownership, but the last mass shooting they had was in 2001, killing of 14 people. Why did it take us so long for us to pass bills to prevent these?
I apologize, I can't hear the incident you're talking about, but I get the gist of your question, which is why is it taking us so long?
By the way.
Why is it taking so long to pass gun legislation? Boy, isn't that the million-dollar question, the multi-million-dollar question. I was thinking, you saw with the tragedy of the Boeing jet, the crash of the airliner, how countries across the globe said there have been 2 accidents in the course of 6 months, taking as many as almost 400 people, 100 and some souls on each flight. And out of an abundance of caution, and out of an understanding that lives are at risk, the planes have been grounded. That model plane has been grounded. And with gun violence, every single day in this country, I liken it to an airliner. We have an airliner of souls being caught and killed from gun violence. Why don't we respond with that kind of action that says, stop, there's something gravely wrong in our system that allows 109 people a day to die in this country, yesterday, today, tomorrow, the next day, the next day. But for some reason, we don't see it like that. There are forces at work that have dragged down the ability to have common sense legislation like H.R. 8, the background check bill, You've been at it longer, Mike, Congressman, so maybe you would talk about the forces that have dragged down the ability to legislate to save lives.
Well, first, let me take a bit more cynical stab at the airline analogy. If you all follow that, the United States of America was not the first country to ground those new jets.
Correct.
Some pointed to the fact that the President of the United States was a big recipient of Boeing Large S. And I know that Doris Matsui, one of our colleagues, and I sent a letter to the FAA on the day before the President, our President, decided to ground the planes, that they needed to be grounded. But it took way too long for our federal government to act. And I think you can look at the gun lobby in a similar way. For way too long, the gun lobby in the United States of America has gone unchecked. They've been able to really have their way in a lot of congressional seats and a lot of Senate seats across the country. After the Sandy Hook tragedy, things really changed on the ground. People were disgusted, and they were asking the same question you asked. What's the matter with you guys? 20 kids were just slaughtered. 6 educators were just slaughtered, and you're doing nothing. And they started tracking contributions from this gun group, and then some other lobbying groups sprung up. Most notably would be Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, his Everytown group, Mayors Against Illegal Guns, Gabby Giffords, my former colleague who was shot while conducting a Congresswoman on the Corner event. You have Moms Demand Action, Everytown. All these different groups sprung up, and now there's a counter in this debate, and there's a counter in the campaign help department too. Before, if you were going to get campaign help from a gun group, it was from the NRA. But now there's Giffords, there's Bloomberg, there's Moms Demand Action. So the NRA has finally met its opponent, and folks are angry. They have the same pent-up frustration that you just expressed, and they want changes. And that's why you saw it with this last election. In the 40 seats that were turned in the House, went from Republican to Democrat, nearly every one of them ran on a responsible gun platform, gun violence prevention. Their constituents wanted them to come to Washington and make the change that you just spoke about. That's why that bill was moved so quickly. That's why it passed the Judiciary Committee. That's why it passed the House.
All right. I have one more question. What would you do to try to prevent people from going around these bills or from trying to find a way around these laws?
Well, I want to talk about background checks and why it actually works. You know, in Pennsylvania, they're saying, how do we keep people from going around the laws? There are going to be people who get their hands on a gun illegally. So some of the things that we can do are background checks. I want you to know the effectiveness of background checks. In 2017, the Pennsylvania Instant Check System, operated by the state police, blocked the purchase of a gun for 13,000 prohibited purchasers. So if people think, oh, you know, bad guys aren't going to try to get a gun, they're not going to try to go through a background check, you're absolutely wrong. Background checks work. They keep guns out of the hands of prohibited purchasers. So we need to make sure that that safety net is complete. In Pennsylvania, our law says that every gun transaction has to go through a background check, with the exception of a long gun. So it's a very old, archaic carve-out. We got to close that hole. Mike's bill will close the hole federally, and we need to do that. Another way we could do it is lost and stolen legislation, that you would have to report your gun missing or stolen. Therefore, if it's caught up in a crime later, we would have an idea whether it was straw purchased and sold illegally to a prohibited purchaser. There's lots of things we can do. None of it is going to cure all gun violence, but we must not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. and public perception is on our side, we're going to get this done. Thank you. And I see we have so many questions, so we'll try to be quicker so we can get all these questions in. Thank you for the questions.
Hi, I'm Lenny Duran, and I'm a junior here at Norristown Area High School. My question is, well, I know the expanding of background checks, I'm more than certain that that will help reduce gun violence, but how do you intend to prevent the selling of illegal guns when somebody else already bought it, passed the background check, and then they sell it illegally?
Well,
Yes.
that's an excellent point. And I'll try and be real quick about this. But the way the federal law works now, if you're a licensed gun dealer, you're required to perform background checks on anyone buying a gun. Then it's left up to the states after that. So that's kind of the floor. That's the absolute minimum. Now, some states, like Pennsylvania, they've boosted it up. My home state of California, they've done a lot. They require background checks for every sale, to family members, to cousins, to the cop down the street, no matter who it is. And but all those states there's a whole bunch of them that only operate at that floor. It's only through the licensed dealer. So what can happen in those states is you can go in to buy a gun at a licensed dealer, be rejected. You can walk out and go to a computer store and get one online, or go to a gun store and get one. And then you can bring that gun to California or to Pennsylvania and commit a crime with that firearm. So that's the idea of creating this level playing field. So background check becomes the first line of defense. And they estimate that there's probably between 20 and 30% of the guns sold are sold outside of a background check system. So you close that part of it. Now, will someone still steal a gun? Yeah. Some places that they make guns. There's some states that in defiance of the federal government, they're trying to exempt their area from any federal government gun regulation. They're calling them sanctuary states, sanctuary cities. I think it was in Montana, they tried to exempt out any guns that were made in the state from any law. So you're always going to have outliers. People are always going to steal stuff, but you can make a big difference with the background checks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Ramir. I'm a senior here, and my understanding, the government only has so much power over each state. So I was wondering, do you think this is why the process is taking so long for the law to become more strict throughout the whole country? Like, do you see in the future, like, the law becomes strict for each 50 state? Like, how long do you think that process will take?
Do you think that the laws will be stricter in each individual state and at the federal level, you're saying? Is there a change coming? I feel like there's a change coming, and we've seen it here in Pennsylvania. But I always argued when I was a member of the Pennsylvania House that in the absence of federal lead and federal action at the congressional level, we have to take matters into our own hands at the state level. We were very slow. We have been very slow in Pennsylvania to do that, but we do have some good laws in place. But all the more reason that the federal government do it, so that it's not a patchwork, so that it's easy to get a gun in one state and difficult in another. All you got to do is cross the state boundary and you have possession of a gun that you maybe should not have. I want to say something about this moment in time, and it has to do with the Parkland shooting. Most people said after Sandy Hook, if we don't do something after Sandy Hook, when babies are slaughtered in their first and second grade classroom, that we as a nation just have lost our soul. We're not going to do anything. But the Parkland shooting, tragic, tragic slaughter of Parkland high school students, changed that narrative. Abraham Lincoln said, without public perception, nothing is possible. But with it, anything is possible. What I see is the public persuasion, the public perception is growing. There's a groundswell that people say we must get control over this. We ask more of our students. My granddaughter is 7 years old. It occurred to me after Parkland, she has to go through active shooter drills. We ask more of our students and implying and imposing on you the fear of safety within your own schools. But that perception is changing. And so I believe we're onto something. I believe the federal government will take the lead, and then the states will have to comply. And that's why I'm pleased to be working with Congressman Thompson on that. Thanks for the question.
Hi, my name is NAHS, and I'm in 12th grade. And my question is, what exactly are you guys take on mental health in schools? Like, would you guys be open to putting more support in the, like, classes-wise or, like, overall, since most of school shooters start from within here, so it would be probably best to help support them mentally here first. And how exactly would you guys help with that?
Public health in schools, mental health support in schools.
We're woefully behind in what should be our obligation to better fund intervention in schools and mental health in general. We're way behind. We made some great progress when we passed the Affordable Care Act, because for the first time mental health was put on the same level playing field with physical health. But then, as you probably know, it's been a constant battle to keep the money in the Affordable Care Act legislation and to keep the Affordable Care Act legislation as the law. This administration has been trying to undermine it, defund it, and it's been a problem, but we need to make a much larger investment in mental health.
And you know that it is the state that funds our schools in the greatest proportion. So as a state representative, I fought for more and more money for education support in our local schools, and part of that should be increased numbers of counselors, decreased ratios of how many students per counselor. We are so far behind, and that's exactly what we should be doing. That's preventative work. It's terrible to have to clean up and help people grieve after the terrible shootings that we're seeing. The preventative help would be so much smarter, so much more humane, so much more cost effective, so much better for all of your futures, all of our futures. I couldn't agree with you more. We're fighting for more funding, state and federal, for mental health in our education system. Really important question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Alicia. I'm a junior, and I was just wondering how you could be. You have to be 21 to buy a bottle of alcohol, but you can only have to be 18 to buy a gun, which also brings me to ask, do you plan on raising the age requirement to buy a gun?
Did you hear that, raising the age requirement?
They did that in Florida. That's one of the laws that I was referencing after Parkland. They raised the age, I think, to 21 in Florida. There's an effort to do that. I know California has done that. Different states have done that. I don't know that you're going to get the federal government to do it, but there's legislation to do that at the federal level.
And I would support that. Thank you for the question.
That was a wonderful question.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jemiah Satterthwaite. I'm a senior. So I want to know, how can you ensure these bills and proposals that you speak of are going to be effective?
Well, how do you know that any bill is going to be effective? One thing you should know, if it's a resolution passed by a city council, a board of supervisors, if it's a state law, or if it's a federal law, if you write that instrument and you pass it to address a problem, the minute it's signed into law, you better start working to refine it, because it's temporary at best. We could hear it today, we could agree on the best law to solve whatever problem you decide, and as soon as it becomes law, you got to start working on the unintended consequences and any oversight that's in that bill. When you pass a bill, you're addressing a problem. Don't let anybody ever tell you you're solving a problem. You're addressing that problem. And I think you need to start with that understanding. And then you need to continue to tweak it. You need to make assessments, find out how it's working, and if something's not working, change it or get rid of it and do something else. And that's the whole purpose. One of the biggest responsibilities, and I think probably the one least focused on by members, elected members of every body, is the oversight component. You know, people have a tendency to write a good bill, they get it passed, they get a newspaper headline, you know, so-and-so saves the world, and then it's on to saving the world with the next bill, rather than spending the time and the resources to stay with that and to monitor it. So we need to always do a better job there.
And I would say it's a good skeptical question. You know, let's say we get, number one, what we have to do is get the Senate to pass H.R. 8. They have to take it up, they have to vote on it, they have to pass it, we need the president to sign it. But we do know that background checks work in keeping guns out of the hands of prohibited purchasers. We just know there's a gaping hole in that background check system. Internet sales, private sales, gun show sales. So if we could tamp down on that, we will absolutely save lives. As I said, that we lost 40,000 people in 2017. The year before numbers were 33,000. We here in this country have seen a spike in gun violence, whether it's accident, suicide, homicide. That's thousands of children each year. So we know it will make a difference. If it saves one life, it's going to be worth it. But I have a feeling we pass it, it's going to save thousands every year.
And we know that the background check stuff works because right after Sandy Hook, two things happened. The state of Connecticut embellished their gun laws and their background check system, and their gun-related crime went down by 45%. At almost the exact same time, the state of Missouri lessened their gun regulations and laws and their background check system, and their gun-related crimes increased 25%. So there's two pretty good examples.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Hello.
So two things. So I understand that you would want like the background check, right? But like with my license, I have to go back to renew it like when I'm 21, my driver's license. So mental health and gun violence, like they're almost out of balance today. So how about like, why isn't there more background checks in the future? So like if I buy a gun, go back like 5-6 years later and get like a psychological test to see like if I'm okay to still own a gun. Like why isn't there regulations like that?
What was the question?
Well, he said that you go back every 4 years to renew your license, although you're not tested to see if your skills are up to date. Why isn't there, when you go back 5 years later and want to purchase a gun, a mental health test? Notice that with every gun sale from the licensed firearm dealer, if you bought one last week, you went through a background check. You got to go through another one this week.
Right.
So it's not as though you get one and it's good for 4 or 5 years. But the question is mental health testing connected with purchases of a gun.
Right, because if like I buy a gun and something happens to me 4 years later and I still own that gun, it's like not balanced, you know what I'm saying? And then my second question, like today as a country, we're more divided than anything, if you haven't noticed. Like political parties, speaking like that, we're more divided and the country's very divided. So I feel as if like Republicans and Democrats are so separated that nothing gets done. So how do you feel like going about that? How do you feel about that topic?
Okay. The division of our politics, how it plays into this, it's a very valuable question, and mental health testing.
I'll take a stab at all of that. A real good example is that as people get older, sometimes they become incapacitated and would fall into your definition of somebody who shouldn't own a gun. Now, we have the ability to identify some of those people already through our Social Security agency. And when President Obama was president, he became frustrated with the lack of any movement on gun violence prevention, and he did an executive order requiring the Social Security to take the folks who have been determined incapacitated, who needed to be in a conservatorship, so somebody else needed to take care of them and watch over them, and prohibited them from owning guns. The next election came, we elected a new president. What do you think the first thing that happened was? New executive order nullifying that.
Right.
So you're right. Politics has consequences. Elections have consequences. On the bigger question of trying to figure out and reassess people, I think you're spot on. It's a very difficult lift. There's a lot of opposition to anything that could be seen as creating any type of a registry. Now, on our bill, on the background checks, we have a specific provision in that that says nothing in this bill can be used to create a federal registry. Because a lot of people, when they hear that, or they see that, or they fear that, they bristle. They don't want, their records kept. They don't want anybody watching them as part of the whole freedom deal. So that would be the problem there. Now, some states do it. My state, California, we have a program called Armed and Prohibited. And if you're a Californian and you buy a gun, if you buy a handgun or an assault weapon in California, it goes on a registry. So the state can look at who owns those guns and juxtapose that with the list of who shouldn't own a gun. And they can find out real quick if somebody who bought a gun legally and then later on, as you described, became prohibited, and they've got an agency within the Department of Justice who will go to your house and they'll say, hey, our records show that you bought this gun legally, but our records also show that since purchase, you've become prohibited.
Right.
So we can do it one of two ways. You can give us the gun, we can either destroy it, help you sell it, transfer it to a family member outside of your home, or we can put you in jail. And it works effectively. It's an expensive program, but it works. Iowa has a great program where if you're convicted of a crime that makes you prohibited, at that time, they drill down. They say, do you own firearms? Because now you're prohibited. And be truthful, because if you say no and we find out later, you're going to jail. Right. So there's a lot of effort to do that, but it's a tough lift.
Okay.
Here in Pennsylvania, we tried to introduce legislation, it hasn't yet passed, that would give others the ability, like in the Dylan Roof case in Charleston. He was in a mental break. There's no doubt about it. And his friends do it. One of his friends literally took his gun away prior to the shooting, but fearing for his own liability for having taken his friend's gun, he gave it back to him. There's legislation that we could pass that would say a family member, a police officer, a medical provider could go petition the court and say, look, this person is in grave crisis. It may be temporary, but in the meantime, please take away his or her weapons so he doesn't hurt himself or others. There are things we could do.
That bill will be passed in this Congress.
There we go.
The red flag bill.
And to your point about divided government and the grave partisanship that is going on, I would say that there's a breath of fresh air in this 116th Congress, a tremendous number of people of very diverse backgrounds, and I will say a tremendous number of women have come to Congress, so many other voices are being heard, but people of color, people who are Muslim, LGBTQ folks. So we have a really diverse set of voices now around the table, and you saw with some legislation this past week, whether it was the emergency declaration blocking that the House passed, you saw that the Senate yesterday passed that same bill, which says that the president just reached too far in his emergency declaration. He's abusing constitutional authority. 12 Republicans voted with that yesterday in the Senate. So I would say there is a growing sense that we must work together on some of these things for the good of the country.
Thank you.
I'm about to say hello. My name is Caleb Page. I'm a 12th grader.
I
just want to know that Pennsylvania has a long history in hunting, but do you think most Pennsylvanians would support that background check?
Flat out, yes. We know that 90+% of folks across this country, and that includes the state of Pennsylvania, believe that background checks work and that we should close the loopholes within the background check system. Absolutely. And yet you point out a very important problem. And I realized it as I was in Harrisburg for 6.5 years in the Pennsylvania House. We here in southeastern Pennsylvania get it. It makes sense. That doesn't mean we're against hunting or sport shooting. I have my middle son, I have 3 sons, all grown. My middle son likes to go shooting, has taken me shooting. So I can speak with a little greater authority. But we do have a very rich culture of hunting and sport shooting here. in this state. That should not get in the way, and I believe what the NRA has done is just create fear that somehow any of these bills, whether it's background checks or anything else, is somehow going to lead to an abridgment of Second Amendment rights and somehow interfere with sports shooting and the like. It's false claims. And they use political tactics to say, you know what, if you vote for that bill, we're going to give you an F rating, and then we're going to try to run somebody against you so you will lose your seat in public service. That's draining away. But you're right, there's a lot that influences whether or not we could pass it. If you put this up for a vote with the Pennsylvania public, it would pass overwhelmingly. We just now have to get the congressional members and also the folks in the Pennsylvania House and Senate to do the same thing.
The pollsters that do political polls on this issue, it's the first time in my life I've been told by professional pollsters not to talk about the real poll numbers. Think about this. I was told, say that it polls over 90%, because it polls so high, if you told people the real number, which is 96%, they wouldn't believe you. So that's how popular background checks are. 84% of NRA members support background checks. It is wildly popular.
And the NRA traditionally supported background checks, but they morphed over the course of the last 2 decades.
They were for them before they were against them.
They were for them before they were against them.
Hi, my name's Angelo, and I was just wondering, well, I know that recently the House just voted that the Mueller probe be made public, and I was just wondering why there's so much support for that.
The Mueller report. We voted a resolution to make it public, fully transparent. America has a right to know. What has the Senate done on that? Did the Senate take that up yet? The Mueller report? Was that? Senate hasn't yet taken up that. We passed a resolution demanding that the Mueller report be made public. I supported that. Republicans, I'm a Democrat, Mr. Thompson is a Democrat. Republicans supported that in the House. I think the American people have a right to know. This has been a very important investigation of the involvement, if any, by this administration and the campaign with Russia. I think it's terribly important. It is a part of our system of laws that we make sure that it is transparently revealed to us. I think we have a right to know as citizens, as voters, what exactly happened. So I will vehemently fight for the revealing of the full Mueller report, and I'm confident we're going to get it. Your thoughts?
Agree. It needs to be public.
I know we're almost running out of time. Thank you for your
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Matthew McCrae, and I'm a junior here at NAHS Area High School. The city of Philadelphia is going through a lot of gun violence, and it has been going through a lot of gun violence for many years. Yes. Young African-American young boys and young African-American young girls are dying every single day, and nobody's not doing nothing about it. Kids don't know what to do, so that's why they have guns, and they're walking around their neighborhoods with guns because they feel like that's the only way that they can protect themselves. So what kind of rules and regulations are you guys going to put in place so that this can stop and Philly can get back to where it was?
Kids in Philadelphia are at great risk. Young people of color, males, African-American males, at the highest risk. What are we going to do about that? I couldn't agree with you more. You described the picture.
If you recall, when I was talking about the background checks and the epidemic of gun violence, I talked specifically about the 30 people a day who were killed by someone using a gun. I mentioned a couple of mass shootings, but I talked specifically about the 30 people a day. It is sad when the media attention seems to be focused on the most horrific of crimes, and that's the mass shooting, any shooting that takes the lives of 4 or more people. But the truth is, as you state, every day 30 people are killed by someone using a gun. Far too often, they're minority lives that are taken, but any life that's taken. And those just kind of get breezed over because they look, and I hear this wherever I go to talk about background checks. I hear that all the time. Well, your law, if that was passed, it wouldn't have stopped Sandy Hook, or it wouldn't have stopped Parkland. And no, but of the 30 murders a day, it would have stopped some of those. So you're absolutely right. And there's other things that contribute that we have to recognize and we have to participate in. We talked a little bit about mental health, but also opportunities for people to do things other than what they're doing now. There's a whole raft of things that we need to be working on.
Thank you for that question. I want to tell you an experience I had. Before I got into public service, I taught at LaSalle University for 10 years. And I had an adult student in a night class. She had 2 sons, 16, twin boys, 16 years old, and she would tell me what they're doing. This one was talented in music and this one was talented in sports. And the next semester, I read in the paper, and I was sure of the name, that one of the 16-year-olds was shot and killed in Philadelphia over a skirmish over nothing. But there you have 16-year-old young children, frankly, with guns in their hands. So what are we going to do? It's going to take a multi-layered approach. Better policing is going to be part of it, where there's actually trust built up between police and the community. We got to tamp down on the illegal trade of guns. And that's the straw purchaser that can sell a gun on the corner for 25 bucks or 100 bucks or whatever it is. It's going to take a multi-layered approach. We have to think of this as the epidemic that it is. And you point out very rightly that minority communities and urban minority communities like Philadelphia, like Chicago, have the heaviest of burdens. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay. Okay, can we say thanks? Okay.
Thank you.
I want to give you something. We thank you for being so smart, so engaged. You really inspire us, but really recognize the power of your voice. And so I have a little gift for my colleague, Congressman Thompson. A couple of years ago, I had several hundred of these made up, and we had rallies during the DNC. You were here for that. And so I wanted to give him an enough t-shirt. He said that in his remarks to you today. Enough already. This is for you.
Well, thank you very much. I spoke at that rally during
You were there.
I was there. I spoke. Ed Randell and
That's right. That's right. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank
it's
you.
an honor
Thanks.
to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, how about a very, very warm round of applause for our 2 congresspeople. Guys, I tell people all the time how proud I am to be a part of this school, this community, you know, how proud I am to be your principal. It is truly a privilege, and I will not lie to you, the number of people during the last hour who just walked over to me and said how blown away they were by the intelligence, by the leadership, by, you know, just the professionalism, the maturity in the room. You know, it's always great to have an Abington grad come here to see that we are better than Abington. I'm sorry, Congresswoman. And I know that Congressman Thompson is going to go back not just to Washington, but to California and to have a new favorite high school to brag about. So please give yourselves a huge round of applause. I do very quickly, I just want to thank School Board President Mr. Ash, who's a huge supporter, and our Superintendent, Mr. Dormer. And then just very quickly, because it wouldn't be right, but none of this stuff happens here today without the amazing help of Ms. Danoff and Mr. Dineno and Mr. Doyle, Mr. Fry, and our maintenance crew. They did a great job. So, and last but not least, Adriana and Victoria.
So, are you going to mention the fact that it was my district that gave you guys Dick Vermeil in a Super Bowl win?
I did not know that. So I just found out. So those of you who are, we have a lot of Eagles fans in the room, right? One of my assistant principals is a Cowboys fan, but we won't talk about that. What? It's sad. Dick Vermeil, who led the Eagles to their first Super Bowl, not victory, but first Super Bowl, came from Congressman Thompson's district in California. So thank you for that. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, at this time, of course, no visit to Norristown is complete without interviews by the great NASD TV crew. So that's going to happen in just a second. The rest of you, we're going to dismiss back to class. I thank you very, very much. You guys are amazing. I love you guys all. Thank you and have a great day. Okay, thank you. Oh, thank you. You guys.